Hello, Sandy. How are you today?
Amy, I am good. I'm in the middle of a snowstorm here. That's why I've got my Sherpa
You
sweater
know,
on here,
you
and
look cozy.
I've got my hair that's been having stocking caps on all day. And I decided it is a day I've got out in lieu of my family reunion, the family china, and I'm having a little British tea this afternoon.
British tea. I love it. I am having green tea as
Mm.
we speak. Yeah.
Pinkies up, pinkies up.
Yep. So this week we finished up our habit conversation last week, which I thought listening back through them was so good. We did 5 recordings on habits. Actually, I think we did 6. Did we do 6?
We did 6.
6 recordings on habits. And all of them, there was so much in them. I've been sharing them on LinkedIn because they resonate so much with the people that follow me on LinkedIn, because it's all about productivity and people are trying to be more productive, which has to do with habits. But this time we're kind of shifting gears a little, not a lot. This is growth mindset. And when I was listening to our last one and editing, and I was thinking about growth mindset, I'm just going to tell you, you have a growth mindset.
Well,
And
aren't you nice?
I know. Well, I was listening to our last conversation, and you were talking about your thought that you couldn't do yoga because you didn't have the balance issues, or you had an inner ear, and so you were telling about that. And then somebody said, well, that's actually a reason to try it. That's a reason for you to do it. And you said, okay, then sign me up. And so I was listening to that and I'm like, well, that's a perfect example of a growth mindset.
But I started out fixed with, I can't do that because.
You did,
Yep.
but then you were open to inputs, which growth mindset, it doesn't mean that you can't be very firm in what you believe, but when you get an input that could change your perspective, you're open to that. That's what growth mindset is.
It's the fascinating. And I just listened to the TED talk on the study with kids.
Right.
Maybe, let's start out just getting everybody, let's get the listeners and both of us on the same page with growth mindset, because we've never, I know for a fact, this is not something we've ever discussed before. And the terminology's never come up in our conversation because frankly, I've heard it as buzzwords, but I really went back and researched and read and watched a TED talk about it, watched some other videos about it, and it really resonated with me. I kept digging down different ferret holes. So Amy, you're always such a good researcher. Why don't you get us on the same page on growth mindset? Right. The mindset of the growth mindset, and not to be fixed, to be open to the growth mindset.
Right. So there's 2 mindsets. There's this growth mindset and a fixed mindset. And a fixed mindset, I'm trying to find the exact example, but one of the things that Carol Dweck, she did the research and she wrote a book on this, and I will attach the link to the article. But one of the things, it's the way you view yourself. If you believe your qualities are unchangeable and you have a fixed mindset and you approach things with the need to prove yourself correct over and over, because you are what you are. And so you have to constantly be proving how good you are because you're not changing.
And avoiding anything that might make you look bad or too much of a challenge because you believe there's no way you can do it.
Right. Right. And you want to make
bad hand of cards, or your hand is your hand. There's nothing you can do about it.
Right. Exactly. So you're going to do the best you do to prove that your hand is a good hand. Mm-hmm. That's what it is. So that's a fixed mindset. And a growth mindset is where you think you have an opportunity to improve. So when I said the yoga example, you took the input of somebody saying, that's actually a good opportunity, a good reason for you to take yoga. And you didn't even hesitate. You're like, all right, Durango yoga, sign me up, and so it was a little bit of a, you've thought this before, but somebody gave you a new thing, new information. And you're like, all right, well, let me do something different.
And I never thought about this before, but when people would ask back in the day, because now I'm going into my 55th year. And there was a day when there are a lot of awards before you turn 40. And I remember being interviewed for the 10 outstanding young, they name 10 outstanding young Omahans every year. And when they were interviewing me, first of all, I thought it was interesting. They said, why do you think you're one of the 10? And my answer was, well, I have no idea. I don't know who the other candidates are. They have a better hand to look at than I did.
Yeah.
But a lot of the questions had to do, what's the secret to your success? Well, how did you become successful? And I would tell you, my success in my business and having customers and my success in public accounting really had to do with the growth mindset, because I never said you can't, I never questioned whether I could do something. And I was never intimidated by other people that went to Ivy League schools or had their JD. And in fact, sometimes they like to remind me, there were people that like to remind me that I should, or they'd throw it. But for whatever reason, that just never bothered me. And I really think it was the growth mindset that was the secret to my success, because that was just my state of thinking, was I can do anything. And I always saw myself as an equal of anyone and didn't put those barriers in my way. Now, does that come with youth? I mean, it's kind of the chicken and the egg. You could say younger people don't know enough, and with maturity, we get smarter. But then with maturity, we get a little bit more stuck in our ways, and we've seen more. So I don't know which way it goes.
Yeah. And I think your mindset was, I may not know this, but I bet I can figure it out.
Right.
And that's a growth mindset. If you are open to acknowledging that you may not know something, you may be wrong, but you're going to do some research and figure it out.
And even knowing people. See, it isn't just, it's learning, but part of it's relationships too. I knew no one. I came to Omaha. I didn't go to Marion. I didn't go to Creighton. I didn't have any of those predetermined networks. But rather than saying, I can never do that, I can never be that person, I can never be president of boards, because I had a growth mindset in my networking and my relationships, simply because I didn't see it as a barrier. I wasn't fixed. And I'd never thought about this before, but if I would have had a fixed mindset, I wouldn't have prospered the way I did in relationships. But I never had that as a setback. And anybody can do it. It's just having that open, I usually say open mind. Now I'm going to say growth mindset. But what did Carol Dweck, am I pronouncing that correctly?
Dweck, I think.
Carol Dweck. It's about the yet, right?
Yeah, not yet. I know. So her video where she was talking about children getting a problem wrong, and the answer is like, oh, it wasn't you're wrong, you don't know that, it was you haven't figured that out yet, not yet, or right. Or moving forward in a grade level, it wasn't that you failed, it was like, just not yet. You'll pass this when you're ready, but not yet. Just keep working on it. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was such an interesting thing to think about, personally, just anything that I'm working on and thinking through and processing. I may not have the perfect answer now. Not yet, though. Not yet, but it's going to come.
Right. Right. No, it just, I don't, it's interesting too, because she's a PhD and has done a ton of research. You know, I speak from oh, that makes a lot of sense to me in a practical way. But she combined studies of the intersection of developmental psych, social
Mhm.
psychology, and personality psychology.
Right.
And this all came together. And I love being an armchair psychologist, but I don't like the scientific white paper stuff.
Mhm.
And her mindset, I thought about my children. I thought about them at different stages in their lives. I thought about my parents, in-laws, older people, how you can turn to more of a fixed mindset because I'm too old and I can't do that anymore. And
Right.
then it made me think about those billboards that have Irma's 98 years old and she just got her degree. You know, the
Right. Right.
not
Yeah.
courage, you know, they'll give you one
Exactly.
word. And
Mhm.
I thought, yeah, because she has a growth mindset, even though she's in her 90s, because, you know, the woman that's still Ruth Bader Ginsburg doing planks, you know,
Right. Exactly.
I could be doing yoga with her, right?
Right. And one of the things that was mentioned in the research was the Buffett formula. Did
I
you
loved that.
did you dig into that? I was
I
like,
did. That could
that
be a
was
whole
another,
other podcast
I
too.
know. But one of the things that captured my attention, and that is Warren Buffett spends 80% of his working day reading and thinking, not doing, reading and thinking.
And I loved, so to add on to that, the quote in here. So really what the Buffett formula is: always learning, never thinking you know everything, relying on other people, not just, he doesn't read about opinions, he
Right.
reads about, that was another thing. And then it made me feel better because I've never liked the opinion section. I'm like, why would I want to read that?
Right.
I like to, he wants to know the facts. And I'm like, I can, good. I always
Yeah.
thought maybe I'm just not philosophical enough to enjoy the opinion section, but I loved this. And I actually read The Snowball. It was a very good book, even though I think later he didn't love the book as much. But in an interview, Buffett told the story. Charlie Munger, as a very young lawyer, was getting around $20 an hour. He thought to himself, who is my most valuable client? And he decided it was himself. So he decided to sell himself an hour every day. He did it early in the morning, working on these construction projects and real estate deals. Everyone should do this. Be your own client and then work for other people too. Sell yourself an hour a day.
Yeah.
I love that. His
Yeah.
best client is himself. It's your best
Right.
asset. Invest in yourself.
Invest in yourself.
Eh,
And this piece, because he and Warren Buffett are doing the same thing. They're reading and thinking. Majority of their day is reading and thinking. And to me, so much of our time is in doing. And I was working well, several clients. I run into this a lot with my clients where they have their day jam packed with doing. They're in a meeting, they're, working on a project, they got a deadline, like it's constant doing, meeting with their team, like whatever it is, but it's like this whole list of doing. And there's no time for thinking, and there's no time for processing. And one of my clients, I'm going to say he should have time to be creative. Like in his job, he needs to be creative, and he doesn't um, have the opportunity in his schedule because he's a manager and
mhm.
managing, running a business and a manager. And, the time to be creative, you got to have that window of brain time, thinking time, and reading time and inspiration time, whatever it is that helps you be your own client.
Mhm. So I help me unwind this on what
Okay.
this is kind of a, we talk about these concepts and sometimes they're black and white, and it's made me think about dissecting a client situation that I'm like, this is why. This is kind of that, why it's unsettling to me and it's difficult for me. And I tell you, one overall comment I'd make is people who have growth mindsets have a hard time working with fixed mindset people.
Right.
Okay, so I'm going to put that out there. So there's somebody I've worked with that I thought about it in here when Buffett and Munger talked about, we don't know everything. We surround ourselves with other people. They really talked about part of their growth mindset. It is definitely the reading, the learning, but it's learning from other people too. They don't have it all figured out.
Right. And they don't think they're the smartest people in the room.
They don't think they're the smartest people in the room. Absolutely not. And they
Yeah.
give other people credit when credit is due.
Yeah.
So there's a client, I could never put my finger on it, that I had worked with, that she was just always right. She never accepts input from other people. She doesn't do it in a bitchy way. Okay. So that's why it doesn't, it's like, oh, she's very kind. She's very polite, but she never praises anybody else. She knows everything. And I've seen a lot of, then as a consultant, so many mistakes were made and a lot of extra time because she would never consult other people on anything. But yet, from a learning from a book standpoint, every degree, everything, and is very learned in wanting to grow herself, but absolutely gives no credit to other people. And I'll literally, in the past, I'd be on the phone and the song Little Miss Can't Be Wrong would be going through my head the whole time. And I'm like, why is this annoying me? And I never felt like, what happens in situations like that is it's impossible to move forward in a collaborative way and in a positive way. We can all learn from other people. Everybody understands different facets of business, in relationships, husbands, wives, kids, nobody has it all figured out.
Right.
And so my question is back to the fixed versus growth mindset. I think people would say from the outside, unless they were really involved in a conversation, that this person had a very high growth mindset. And I would say they actually have more of a fixed mindset, because you can't learn everything in books and you don't have it all figured out.
Right. Right. And if she was constantly trying to prove that she was right, that she knew the right way to do it, then
backwards momentum.
Right. There's no input. So I will tell you, I dug into how to work with people with a fixed mindset.
Okay.
And I didn't really find anything that was substantial of do this, because it was just a lot of, this is what they're going to do. They're going to keep proving that they're right. And the only thing you can do is model, be open to other parties. If you are a manager, you have to make sure the person with the fixed mindset isn't dominating the direction of the whole team.
That's a great point.
And making sure that you're taking input from everybody. And so that's one way to manage it as a manager. In relationships, I wasn't finding much that was helpful.
So there are times in life you have to walk away,
Yeah.
because this one, I didn't feel like I was effective. And it's like, it's a waste of their money, because, if somebody doesn't want any input, why would you hire a consultant? Right.
Right.
And even in relationships, you hate to say that, but it's easier to say if we use our kids as an example. If back to that TED talk, which was on education and kids, if the kids are in a situation where, whether it be a teacher, a mentor, they're getting suppressed because of a fixed mindset, we do everything to try to change the situation, right? Yeah. And maybe we need to do that, be that same advocate for ourselves and recognize it.
Right.
You always got to try, but it is difficult. I mean, you bringing this up about, it's a great point. How do you work with somebody or change something with a fixed mindset? You can try, because it's always worth trying. I would say where I would start, again, it totally depends on the person, is try to introduce theories, in this situation, try to give other people credit, try to see if she will accept input. And then after banging your head on the wall for a year, you might have to walk away.
Right.
But it's kind of like the alcoholic or somebody with dependency. You say they have to make up their minds that they want to try something different. You can't force somebody. And I think it's even harder with a fixed mindset, because that's hard to break away from. And how do you think people get there, Amy? How
Well,
do you get to that point?
you know what? That's a good question, because I know somebody with a fixed mindset. And one of the things that she says is, it's just my personality. That's just how I am. Like, and I'm like, well, at some point, that's not an acceptable excuse. Like if you're, you can't. And so I almost wonder if it has to do with how they're raised. I don't know. That's such a good question. If somebody's constantly telling them that, challenging them and making them prove that they're right, or not accepting any gray, or
Or
I don't.
telling them they can't do things, and this is just the way it is, because this is, you know what, they're the haves, we're the have-nots, this is just the way it is. But I kept thinking about my grandparents, and as a child, one very impactful thing for me, and it was not all together, but I had grandparents, and my parents were very good too, but there's something about hearing it from somebody outside your parents, right?
Right.
But they would always tell me, I had a grandfather who told me, you're going to be somebody. And it was authentic. He's like, yeah, you're going to do some things. I just know that about you. And he wasn't specific, but I always had this in me that I believed that, and I was at a very young age, and I've shared this story before with, I actually shared it with an aunt and uncle from my ex-husband's side. And it was 10 years ago, and I ran into them at a family event, and they said, you told us about when our grandkids were young, we were kidding around asking for advice, and you said how your grandfather had always told you that, and your grandparents. They said, we do that with our grandkids. We look for things, we encourage them. They said it's the best advice we've ever been given, but look for encouragement. And I'd say the other thing is nobody defined for me what success was. I didn't have the social media. There was no life script model. And I think it took the barriers off. That's one question I had, back to succeed. So what is success? And it's different for everyone, right?
Right. And I think that skill set, like what your grandparents did, they didn't label you with a specific, you're this, like you're whatever. They just kind of labeled the opportunity out there.
Growth, right?
Or you're right. It wasn't like, oh, you're stubborn.
Right.
It was like, sometimes you do some stubborn things, but it's not like you are that. You are. And I think that is where some of us might fail with our children, is like, you know what, she's stubborn. Like if I labeled my child stubborn, then in her mind, forever her life, she's stubborn. And it's just a personality trait. And I think that's probably either she's going to be proving me right, or she's going to be proving me wrong the whole time. So
what I heard from my grandfather was, you have a lot of potential and the opportunities are limitless. And that put no boundaries, right?
Yeah.
And I was pretty young. There's back to developmental, that was, he'd read some, it was something that I already felt proud of. And he would see things that I knew, like I wrote a little book once, or I cared for my grandmother. He noticed the things that mattered, right? And that's kind of a value factor though, too. So I think the good lesson for us with anybody we work with, it gets back to you can put a lot of time on the people you want to fix with a fixed mindset, but don't forget about the ones who have great opportunity to grow their growth mindset, to encourage in a positive way. It's such a human nature to get so caught up on fixing the bad
Mhm.
rather than planting those little seeds of goodness in the potential.
Yeah, I love that.
And with my kids, what I always try to ask is, now that they're young adults, I really, what are they trying to achieve, and let them tell me what success looks like to them.
Yeah.
It's so easy to try to tell them what steps they should be taking, but if I start from a place of what's success for you, it's a much more fluent conversation, and you can start a conversation, especially with an adult child, a friend, that puts them in a fixed mindset, because you've already put them in the zone of where you think they should go. So
Right.
that's not growth, right? Because you're
Right.
bound in a pen.
Yeah. Right. It's interesting. So one of my girls is very independent. Actually, all of my girls are very independent, but one I had a conversation with today. And so I'm labeling all of them, but I think it's a positive label. I'm like, you
Right.
go girls. So, and I admire their strength. Um, but she called, and as having young adults, I'm very cautious not to tell them what to do, more so than I probably ever was when they were growing up. I've always been super mindful of letting them try to figure things out. And, but as young adults, it's like a constant just holding back, never giving advice, and just letting them lead the conversation and tell me what they're planning on doing. But anyway, she called asking for advice this morning. And I'm always like, oh my gosh, I feel so like
Nice.
sweet that you asked, or you're asking my advice. But when we got off the phone, I didn't even I don't think I told her anything new. She already had a plan. She already had everything figured out. And she's like, Mom, I just wanted to make sure I was on the right path. And she's getting ready to graduate, and she's trying to figure out rent and what she can afford and where she's going to move and all this stuff. So, and she had it all figured out. But it was
Good for
just
her.
so sweet to hear her say, I just wanted to make sure I was on the right path, and that's why I called you. So anyway, I feel like I'm saying tapping myself on the back, but
No, it's good.
it was a good mom moment.
And independence doesn't mean you're fixed in thought either. Being independent is independent of growth, right? And you can very much have a growth mindset and be independent. Doesn't mean you're needy on other people and other things, right?
Right.
Now, how
Yeah.
about the Wooten? I got to find that. That was so good. The Wooten, gosh, where was that? The basketball coach, is it John Wooten?
Oh, yes. What was that? Sorry, I'm with you too, but I don't.
Basically said you're never a failure until you start blaming other people for what you did wrong. And I'm not saying it exactly right, but I loved that, because I hate the blame game. And basically, if you fail at something, as long as it's kind of saying, if you blame other people, that's a fixed mindset. That's not a growth of trying to improve. What do I do wrong? How do I learn from other people? If you get to the point of blaming other people, then you've failed.
Right. It's not me, it's them.
It's not me, it's them. And I love that, because it's like, if you ever go there, it's a great check with yourself when you're blaming somebody to say, oh, wait a second. That's a really quick way to look at that. Here we go. I just found it.
Blaming a circumstance too.
Right.
Like
blaming a circumstance. That's a very good point.
I mean, it's not just other people, it's like a circumstance, and thinking you have no control over anything. The world, you're the victim of what's happening in the world.
Okay, so it says we can all learn from our mistakes. The legendary basketball coach John Wooden says that you're not a failure until you start to assign blame. That's when you stop learning from your mistakes, you're denying them.
Oh,
and I love what you've added. So don't blame people or circumstances.
Yeah.
And hey, it's kind of like back to the happiness factor. There's always going to be uncontrollables. It's how you respond to them. And
Right.
if you don't respond at all, or you say there, I'm going to blame them, that's called inaction and nothing's going to happen. And you have failed because you're not
Right.
doing anything.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're moving backwards, right?
Right. Yeah. I think reactions are telling, like how we react to things are so telling of whether we are in a growth mindset or a fixed mindset. Because your reaction is somebody's proving me wrong, so I'm
Mhm.
going to be angry and I'm going to prove the other way, or oh, I'm going to learn from this.
Right.
Interesting. Oh my gosh, I love this growth mindset concept. So anyway, I'm excited that we had this conversation. I think there's some good nuggets in here. We have some articles that I will attach to the show
Perfect.
notes where we can
You're
get in
very
there.
good.
Yeah, for people to
Perfect.
read and look at.
All
So
right. I'm ready to deploy a growth mindset using my atomic habits. That's what I'm doing.
woohoo, look at us go.
All right, Amy, until next time, we'll have to
All
check
right.
in. Bye-bye.
Thank you.